There are only so many different facets of your own personality that you can get to, and you find yourself repeating yourself. So it's
Westport, Connecticut, summer of 2008. Paul Newman, the immortal icon of Hollywood, was spending his final days bedridden, his body racked with waves of excruciating pain. Every afternoon, he would request a Panasonic tape recorder to be placed beside his pillow, not to capture memories for a memoir, nor to prepare material for a final documentary, but to confess. A revelation no one could have anticipated: 6 secret homosexual relationships with some of the most famous male actors in Hollywood. There was one who once held his hand tightly in the middle of the night, swearing eternal love, only to quietly send copies of Paul's love letters to a tabloid reporter the very next morning in exchange for hush money. Another had secretly recorded all of their private conversations just to threaten him. If he dared to say a word, the whole of Hollywood would see him as a delusional madman. So, who were these men? And what made Paul keep it all buried until the brink of death? The first person Paul Newman mentioned on those self-recorded tapes, none other than, was Steve McQueen. One Steve McQueen, when love turns into a fire that burns them both. Steve McQueen, that bastard. Paul Newman let the words slip out as if he had poured a lifetime of bitterness into each syllable. It wasn't just anger over a single act or a few words. It was fury, built up over years of a distorted past, suppressed emotions, and a love so intense and toxic it suffocated them both. They first met backstage at the Photoplay Awards in 1956. At the time, Paul was a married man, while Steve was just a young actor trying to make a name for himself through small T roles. But the look Steve gave Paul, brazen, raw, and possessive, was something Paul couldn't turn away from. Soon, their brief early encounters evolved into secret rendezvous that lasted for hours at the Chateau Marmont Hotel. In a recorded tape, Paul once admitted, "I used to think he truly loved me. But then I realized he just needed someone to prove he could conquer even Newman." And when Confidential magazine ran a rumor in 1962 suggesting Steve McQueen had a peculiar relationship with a male actor in New York, Steve immediately reacted. Less than a week later, he was seen arm in arm with Anne Margaret at the premiere of The War Lover. At the same time, Paul was approached by Steve's lawyer with a document demanding he sign a non-disclosure agreement. You know what happens to people who get exposed, right? Steve whispered as he handed Paul the paper. You've got a wife, kids, a daughter. Don't let it all collapse over one moment of weakness. He didn't just pressure Paul. He erased every trace. He used money, the law, even under-the-table media connections. Paul once accidentally discovered a payment of over $15,000 Steve had made to an editor at Variety, just to ensure the name Newman never appeared in an investigative piece that was being drafted. But that wasn't even the worst of it. In 1965, during an appearance on The Merv Griffin Show, Steve scoffed casually when asked about the rumor that a man had once been obsessed with him. He replied, "Can't remember his name, probably just some crazy fan. The kind that writes love letters and knocks on my door at midnight. Creepy stuff." Paul heard it, and he understood. Steve didn't just want to erase the past. he wanted to incinerate it and force-feed the ashes to everyone else. During a confrontation backstage on the set of The Towering Inferno in 1973, Paul screamed, "Why the hell did you make the whole world think I'm insane?" Steve simply smirked, opened a drawer, and tossed out a cassette tape. "Just in case, if one day you say the wrong thing, I've got all the proof I need to answer back." He had secretly recorded every private conversation, every argument, every confession of love, every moment of vulnerability. Steve kept it, all like a stash of weapons, ready to be deployed if Paul ever dared to betray him. When Steve married Ally McGraw in 1973, Paul said nothing. But a few days later, a package was delivered to Steve's home. Inside was a torn shirt, one Steve had worn after a drunken night at Paul's Vermont cabin. The blood stains, the smell of liquor, the lipstick marks, all still intact. It wasn't a gift. It was a final warning. In a choked voice on tape, Paul once said, "He used love like a blade. Every hug was a cut. But I still kept coming back. I still loved him, even though I knew if I took one more step toward him, he'd be the one to kill me." Still, not everyone who walked into Paul's life hurt him and then walked away. One man entered, not as a lover, but like a storm, bearing power and dominance. A man who once openly protected Paul, only to later wield that very protection as a tool to control everything. That man was none other than Marlon Brando. 2. Marlon Brando. A love slipping between passion and pain. Their first meeting took place in 1961 at a fundraising gala held at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. That evening, Paul arrived accompanied by his wife, Joanne Woodward, maintaining his usual polished and elegant style. In contrast, Brando showed up late, wearing a wrinkled shirt, his eyes both cold and defiant, and quietly stood behind Paul throughout the event. When he finally initiated conversation, Brando said, "I thought you'd be as boring as what the papers wrote," then smiled. "But it turns out you're the only one here who's not pretending." And for the very first time, Paul, who always kept his distance from flowery words, did not respond. From coffee dates in Westwood, to nights wandering around Silver Lake, to sudden trips to Palm Springs no one knew about, a relationship that could not be named gradually formed between them. Paul loved with seriousness and sincerity in his feelings, but Brando was different. For him, even love could be just a role to play. He didn't love like ordinary people do, Paul recalled in a recorded tape dated August 3, 2008. He pulled me away from the familiar world, then pushed me into strange rooms, with people I didn't know, situations I couldn't understand, and glances I had absolutely no control over. The meetings arranged by Brando often took place in secluded villas in Laurel Canyon or short-term rental apartments in Venice Beach, always attended by directors, producers, reporters, along with vague promises of films, fame, and awards. At first, Paul thought those were just parties. But later on, he realized he was merely a part of the behind-the-scenes scripts directed by Brando, where all attention focused on Marlon, and he was just a supporting role. existing only as long as he was useful in staged media performances. Worse still, it was Brando himself who leaked Paul's private, handwritten letters, tender lines full of emotion and trust, to Mark Weller, a well-known photojournalist who regularly provided information to the Los Angeles Mirror. In 1960, the newspaper suddenly published an anonymous article titled "Love Behind the Lens," telling the story of a famous actor who had won the Venice Award, torn between his family and a secret relationship with a black-haired film icon. Everyone tacitly understood that character was Paul. Only Paul did not expect that it was Marlon who had left the envelope containing the letters at the newspaper's reception desk. Why did he do that? Because Brando needed a scandal. He needed to be named. He needed the press to dig up old photos and stir up past stories just to ensure that the name Marlon Brando would never disappear from the public's mind. And Paul, who had once loved, once trusted, once remained silent, ultimately became the price for Brando's vain desires. What made it even more painful was when Joanne, Paul's faithful wife, accidentally found a copy of one of the letters in the bookshelf. She said nothing. She only left a small note for Paul. "If you need a place to come back to, I'm still here. But if you need another lie, I'm not the one who can help you." Then winter came to Connecticut. For weeks, Paul did not step outside his house. According to his daughter, Nell Newman, that was the time when her father often woke up in the middle of the night, quietly went out to the back porch, and smoked alone in the biting cold. No one asked, but everyone understood. In a recording near the end, Paul confided, "I once thought that if I were patient enough, if I loved him long enough, he would change." But Brando didn't change. He only knew how to turn emotions into tools for survival. And I let him turn me into such a tool, even though I knew I didn't deserve to be treated that way. His voice then lowered, soft as a sigh. I loved him in a way no one should ever love another. The story between Paul and Brando didn't end with a fight, nor with any farewell words. It quietly closed when Paul stopped answering calls, stopped replying to letters, and stopped believing that love could make someone change. But the lingering regret never faded. People thought Redford was the peak of the pain. But no, because the next name Paul mentioned was a 24-year-old young man who made all of America cry. A rebellious soul, fierce and gone too soon. Can you guess who that was? 3. James Dean, The Companion and the Fateful Night in Mexico. For Paul Newman, James Dean may not have been the most scandalous romance, but it was undoubtedly the love that broke his heart more than anything else. It was a love that began with admiration, grew through the deep connection of two kindred spirits, and ended in heartbreak, a kind of heartbreak so persistent that it haunted a person until the end of their life. They first met in the spring of 1955 on the cold cement set of Warner Brothers. At that time, Paul was 30 years old and playing the lead role in Somebody Up There Likes Me, while James, only 24, had just become widely known following the success of East of Eden. Although they could have been rivals, the very first look James gave Paul did not carry any hint of competition. It was a stunned, amazed gaze. And right after that came a smile. A smile so powerful, it caused Paul to toss and turn, unable to sleep for 3 consecutive nights. They began to see each other more frequently, sometimes in a hidden corner of a late-night diner on Ventura Boulevard, other times on aimless drives in James's brand-new, sharp-edged Porsche 550. Lazy afternoons were spent reclining, listening to La Boheme playing inside a wooden cabin in Ojai, where they pretended to be co-actors rehearsing lines. But in truth, each line was a silent, unnamed declaration of love. One rainy night, after the premiere of Rebel Without a Cause, James told Paul, "I don't need anyone to understand me. I just need you not to pretend when you're in front of me." Paul didn't respond with words. He simply took the young man's hand and placed it over his chest, right where his heart was pounding wildly. Yet life does not allow such beautiful loves to remain untroubled. In June that year, an unknown paparazzo named Eddie Prescott captured a moment of the two exchanging a kiss through the glass window of a car parked near Sunset Strip. No newspaper dared to publish it openly, but within days, the column Shadow Lovers of the Silver Screen in the Los Angeles Herald-Express sent shock waves through Hollywood. Though no names were mentioned, anyone reading clearly knew who was being targeted. Immediately, Warner Brothers terminated James's promotional contract, while Paul was pulled out from a film project by director George Stevens. What was even more terrifying was the reaction from the film industry insiders. A producer once sent a message directly to Paul's fax machine, writing, "If you don't want to end up like Montgomery Clift, you better hold your wife's hand in public." James began to deteriorate. He gradually started avoiding Paul. Calls went unanswered. Letters received no reply. Once, Paul stood outside James's house at midnight, knocking for hours. No one came out. Only a small note slipped through the door crack, written in trembling handwriting. "I am not worth living if my existence is wrong in your eyes." Gone. 3 days later, James was hospitalized due to an overdose of sleeping pills. Luckily, he was saved, but the media would not let go. Some outlets like Daily Variety reported the young actor is experiencing a severe emotional crisis. Meanwhile, a columnist from the New York Post coldly remarked, "James Dean should learn to be a decent human being before learning how to be an idol." Paul also fell into crisis. He was torn between two worlds. On one side, fame, career, and family, with Joanne Woodward. On the other, a love fading into despair. He didn't know how to save James without dragging both of them into the abyss. In September that year, James sent Paul one final message. "Mexico City, Friday. If you don't come, I'll understand." But Paul did not go. At that time, he was in New York, preparing with Joanne for a photo shoot for Life magazine. He held a plane ticket and was already at LaGuardia Airport. Yet he turned back out of fear, weakness, a lack of courage to risk everything he had painstakingly built. And then on September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car accident in Cholami, California. The news was broadcast at 8 p.m. on CBS radio. Paul heard it while sitting in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel. For the next 3 days, he neither ate nor slept a wink. In a 2008 summer recorded interview, Paul recalled, "I sat looking at my hands. They did not tremble. No tears fell. There was only one question echoing in my mind. Why didn't I get on that plane? If I had gone that day, would he still be alive?" From then on, Paul Newman never spoke of James Dean to anyone, but those close to him said that whenever he drank too much, he would look up at the ceiling and whisper, "I'm sorry. You could have lived a brilliant life." In his final years, Paul kept a faded handkerchief in his bedside drawer, the only memento left from their last trip to Ojai together. And then, as if fate refused to grant Paul peace, the next person who entered his life was a complete opposite. Robert Redford, gentle, warm, loving, like a sad melody. But in the end, that too closed with betrayal. For Robert Redford, a betrayed love amidst millions of eyes. In 1969, Hollywood was swept up in a frenzy over the cowboy blockbuster called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The media hailed it as the perfect pairing of two men that audiences had ever seen on screen. In the film, Paul Newman played Butch, a rugged, intelligent, and cunning man, while Robert Redford portrayed Sundance, cold, sharp, and dangerous. Yet few knew that during the last days of May, when scenes were being shot at Zion National Park in Utah, something else was quietly growing beneath every shouted cut. A love story that was not part of the script. At that time, Paul Newman was already 44 years old, living peacefully with his wife, Joanne Woodward, in Connecticut. Meanwhile, Robert Redford, only 32, was married to Lola Van Wagenen and was a father of 3 children. Both men were devoted family men. However, between them existed an inexplicable magnetic pull, a force that made them silently watch each other during every meal, on set, patiently wait until the next scene just to stand near one another, brush shoulders, or simply steal a few extra seconds of eye contact longer than usual. One weekend night, when the entire film crew stayed at an inn in Springdale, Utah, according to a lighting technician named Dennis Corbin, he once saw Paul standing quietly outside Redford's room balcony at midnight, holding a cigarette, eyes red and watery. I didn't ask anything, but then I saw Robert open the door, pull him inside, and both of them disappeared. That was not the only time. From 1970 until the early 1980s, those two men seemed to live parallel lives. By day, they were legendary co-stars, and by night, secret lovers. Yet only one of them truly believed in the relationship. The other chose to deny it. In a recording dated July 14th, 2008, Paul Newman once confessed, "We both had families, children, reputations. But I loved him with a kind of feeling that didn't fit into any mold. I thought, if I were patient enough, silent enough, one day he would take my hand in the light, just like he once held it in the dark." But that day never came. In 1976, Paul had planned to reveal the truth to his close New Yorker journalist friend, Stephen Close, who had conducted an in-depth interview with him the previous year. They arranged to meet at the Algonquin Hotel in Manhattan. However, just hours before the interview, Paul received a call from Robert Redford's representative. "If you say a word, you'll lose everything." That very night, journalist Close received an anonymous fax containing harsh accusations. Paul Newman was labeled mentally unstable, abusing prescription alcohol, and once shoved a female assistant while drunk. The interview was canceled. Paul's career gradually stalled, with no one understanding the real reason. Only weeks later, a tabloid in Palm Springs called the Daily Star published a rumor. A veteran star was being shunned by a longtime co-star for showing signs of aggressiveness and emotional instability. Though unnamed, the media implicitly knew who was being referenced. And Robert, the co-star Paul had once supported, chose complete silence. On a rare occasion, at the 1980 BAFTA Awards, when a Bay reporter asked, "Do you still keep in touch with Paul?" Robert replied casually, "We created something wonderful together, but everyone has to move on." After saying that, he turned his back and walked away without waiting for any follow-up questions. And Paul? He returned home, wrote a few more lines in an old diary with trembling handwriting. "The one who once called me light now uses me as darkness to shield his public image." He didn't just turn his back on me, he broke the part of me that I dared not expose without him. That love did not end with a farewell. It ended in a silence, carefully orchestrated. And that silence lasted forever, until the coffin lid was closed. 5. Montgomery Clift. The last unfinished love and the nameless pain. I once believed that nothing could ever bring me down. Until the day Joanne stood before me, her hands trembling as she handed me the letter she found under her pillow, a handwritten note from Monty, written in blue ink, slanted handwriting, signed with his full name. I had never seen such a desperate look in anyone's eyes. In 1966, while Paul was filming Hombre in Tucson, Arizona, Joanne Woodward unexpectedly flew to the set without any prior notice. In her hand was an opened envelope. Without reproach or tears, she uttered only one sentence. "So this is why you've been sleepless for the past 2 years?" Montgomery Clift had been regularly writing handwritten letters to Paul after each time they met. These letters did not carry a romantic tone, but were monologues soaked in tears. On one occasion, Monty wrote, "I don't need you to choose me. I just ask you not to deny my existence." Joanne read them all. And the worst part was, one of those letters was discovered by a costume assistant and later leaked to Clara Jenkins, a journalist for the National Enquirer. That November, the media exploded. Headlines ran across newspapers everywhere. Paul Newman and Monty Clift, a hidden truth? 20th Century Fox immediately issued a statement demanding Paul clarify extramarital relationships that could affect his commercial image. Within 48 hours, Joanne packed her things and left the house. She left behind a folded letter with only one line. "If you decide to live a lie, then at least don't drag me along." Paul nearly went insane, not because the secret was exposed, but because he could not protect anyone, neither Joanne, nor Monty, nor even himself. A few days later, Monty called from New York. His voice was broken, but resolute. "I'm sorry, but I can't endure it anymore. I don't want to live as a shadow. I don't want it to be your secret." Paul begged Monty to fly to Los Angeles. He promised to move, start over, even publicly reveal everything if necessary. But Monty refused. Less than a month later, on the night of January 23, 1967, Paul received a call from Kevin McCarthy, Monty's close friend. His voice choked on the other end. Monty was just hospitalized. He overdosed on sleeping pills. The doctors saved him, but he doesn't want to see anyone anymore, especially not you. Paul completely broke down. In just 4 short weeks, he lost his wife, his lover was hounded by the media, had his contract for Cool Hand. Luke stalled due to personal reasons, and worse, was sued by Universal Studios for breach of moral clauses, demanding $1.2 million in damages, an enormous sum at the time. Paul was secretly admitted to a psychological rehabilitation center in suburban Connecticut under a false identity. According to medical records, he was diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder due to emotional trauma, neurotic depression, accompanied by self-rejection symptoms. No one knew this happened, because he paid to hire a team of lawyers and media specialists to erase every trace. His private therapist, Dr. Richard Hale, once wrote in his diary, later leaked, he no longer wanted to live, but also lacked the courage to die. It was the darkest state I have ever witnessed. Monty did not wait for his recovery. 9 years later, on a cold February night in 1976, Montgomery Clift was found dead in his West Hollywood apartment from a heart attack after a phone call ended with a hoarse scream. He was gone, but I was still alive, living forever in the moment when I should have held his hand. I once thought I was strong, but in the end, I was just a coward who knew how to love. The tape stopped there. There was no continuation, but precisely because of that, it became the most haunting fragment in Paul Newman's life, the man who, for half a century, buried a mistaken love so deeply that he only had the courage to speak of it when his life was measured in mere weeks. 6. Sal Mineo, a young love, buried by prejudice. At that time, Paul Newman was nothing less than a man torn apart inside. Although outwardly he still maintained a calm demeanor, remained an ideal role model, and was regarded as the perfect husband in the eyes of the American public. But deep within, he was breaking down. After Steve, he fell into a terrifying abyss, haunted by torment over his own identity. The man who once loved silently had now become the reason he could see nothing but lies, violated wounds, and an overwhelming sense of manipulation. In September 1974, Paul sought out a psychotherapist in West Hollywood, following a discreet suggestion from Joanne, his quietly understanding and patient wife. He didn't say much, only sighed, "I'm exhausted. I need a place to breathe." And it was there, on a quietly gray, rainy afternoon, like smoldering ashes, that Sal Mineo entered his life. By then, Sal had long since stepped away from the spotlight of the stage. After his role in Rebel Without a Cause, people once hailed him as the second James Dean. But because of that similarity, Sal endured a cruel fate as well. Hollywood's machinery discarded him for being fragile, sensitive, and too genuine to fit the mold, and for the whispers about his sexual orientation. "Are you in therapy too?" Paul asked. Sal nodded, then touched his temple. Not to cure a disease, but to heal what people made me believe was a disease. From then on, they began taking walks together after each session. No hugs, no kisses, no flirtatious words. Just two lonely men trying to find a normal breath in a world that was already suffocating. Sal once quietly slipped a small note into Paul's jacket pocket. If they call you a freak, then I'm happy to be freaky with you. Their love came as softly as a breath, not as rushed as with Steve, nor as intense as with Brando. Every morning, Paul would find a handwritten note left at his door, penned carefully, Sal by Sal. Did you sleep well? I often wonder if one morning you woke up and didn't find me anywhere. Would you come looking for me? But Paul once confessed, Sal was the first person who made me feel I didn't need to hide who I was. Being with him, I forgot that I was Paul Newman. They had planned a trip together to Venice in the spring of 1976, where Sal nurtured the idea of writing a screenplay for both of them to star in, about two men who accidentally find each other in a city swallowed by floods. But that trip never happened. On the night of February 12, 1976, Sal was stabbed to death right outside his apartment in West Hollywood, as he was about to enter after rehearsing for the play, P.S. Your Cat is Dead. The attacker was an unknown young man. The police initially concluded it was a robbery. But Paul knew better. It was the end for someone who dared to live authentically. When he heard the news, Paul remained silent for 3 days. He didn't talk to anyone, only sat quietly on the rooftop, looking down over the city. And in a later recorded tape, his voice choked up. I used to think I was the one who healed him. But in truth, Sal was the one who pulled me out of the darkness. He never demanded anything from me, just that I dared to live honestly as myself. And I never got the chance to say thank you. Paul Newman has passed away, taking with him tapes that have never been revealed before. Names, romances, wounds, all remain there, silently hidden in the shadows of a dazzling, yet deceitful Hollywood. He once said, "Man, I don't tell stories to be forgiven. I tell them so I won't be forgotten." And now, it is you who is listening to that final confession. But have you ever wondered how much of this story is truth? And how much is just the torment of a soul quietly counting its last breaths? Please leave a comment to share your thoughts with us. Don't forget to like the video, share it with those who once admired Paul Newman, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next part.